Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to talk about auditing your club records. I'm Joanne Hermiston, and presenting with me today is Becky Cruz. In the back room, we have Justin Schell answering questions. If you do have any questions during the presentation, you can type them into the question box. We will try to answer them today. And for club-specific questions, please send an email to support@bivio.com. If you've noticed in the chat box, we also have a link to the audit form we'll be reviewing today, as well as copies of these slides. Now, let's get started with auditing your club records. First, we have a poll question for you. We know many clubs changed brokers during 2024. How many broker changes did your club have? So we'll launch that poll, let you make some responses, and then we'll close that poll. Let's go on to poll number 2. Does your club reconcile your Bivio and broker records every month? Looks like we have at least 81%, so most everyone is reconciling their accounts. That's great. So we asked clubs if they plan to do a club audit and why. And here's a few responses that we received. This first club answered no. They are not planning to do an audit. Now you might think that the reasoning sounds good since they do monthly reconciliations and balanced every year. These two clubs answered yes. They plan to do an audit. Here are the reasons. One said, we didn't audit for many years and it was nasty. Mistakes got compounded. Another club said, it makes sense and it is an accuracy check. We have found discrepancies in the past and they were caught by the audit. I hope that once you've seen this webinar, that you will all see why the first club's reason for not doing an audit was faulty. Their monthly checks would have missed some important aspects of their accounting. By doing a comprehensive club audit, you can avoid the mistakes the second club made. They learned the hard way. And you know what? People who are members of investment clubs are people who like to learn. In our experience, members enjoy participating in the audit process because they learn new things about their investment club accounting. So what is an audit? It's a verification of the accuracy of your club's Bivio records by someone other than your club treasurer. You do an audit for a variety of reasons. For example, you should know that your treasurer is doing what you think they're doing with your club finances. This is especially important if it seems like they've been taking a lot of beach vacations lately. You want to make sure your taxes are prepared accurately. Since they are prepared from the data in Bivio, you need to know that the data is right. Just because your Bivio site shows a lot of numbers doesn't mean they're useful for anything. Without verification, your taxes may just be garbage in, garbage out. And just a reminder that all of your club members will be held responsible if you don't file correct taxes. Also, you want to make sure your members' ownership is being tracked accurately so that income and expenses are divided up correctly and the tax status of your account is being tracked correctly. And finally, it's important to demystify your club's finances and spread the burden of making sure your club is keeping accurate records. Your club treasurer has a big responsibility because your club has to comply with partnership tax requirements. Unlike your investing activities, the IRS is not as forgiving in terms of you being a novice doing so. It's important that every club member have a general understanding of what club accounting is about and what can and cannot be easily handled by your treasurer. The simpler your club finances, the simpler your audit will be, and there's no reason not to keep things simple. There are several types of regular verification that should go on in your club. Each is a little bit different, but they all interrelate. Each month, your club treasurer should do a monthly reconciliation. This should go very quickly. They just need to confirm that the cash balances and the number of shares of stock agree with your brokerage statements. They also should have you confirm your member payments were recorded correctly. A brief report on these things should be part of the treasurer's report at your club meetings. These 2 quick checks won't find all the issues that might be wrong in your accounting, but they will highlight many of the most common ones and allow you to address them in a timely manner. Yearly, we recommend first that your club do an independent audit. This should be done by an audit committee, which does not include your club treasurer. At tax time, your treasurer will do a final check to verify that your 1099s agree with your club records and what is reported on your tax forms. These checks may sound like a lot of work, but if you use Account Sync to make entries in your records, you set up your record keeping to be simple, and your treasurer verifies everything monthly, then the year-end verification should go very quickly. Today we're discussing in depth how to do your club audit. Our treasurer training webinars get into more details about doing monthly reconciliations, and our tax preparation webinar will be getting into further details about what to look for on your 1099s. Now, when should you do an audit? We recommend that you do it in January. And why is that? Well, first, your regular December end-of-year brokerage statements are ready, so you'll have information for the full year to compare to your Bivio entries. The biggest step in doing your club's taxes is getting your records in shape. If your records are verified in January, then doing taxes in February when 1099s arrive will be a very quick process. Besides, what else do you have to do in January? For those who get antsy about getting taxes done, an audit helps fill time until taxes can be prepared. And for those who live in cold climates, who wants to go outside in January? You can do your audit inside where it's nice and warm. So what exactly are you going to do during your audit? You're going to compare the entries you've made in Bivio to your financial institution records. You do this using reports and transaction lists from Bivio, and statements and summary lists from your brokerage and from your bank account if you have a separate bank account. How do you do an audit? Well, first you pick a date. It'll probably take you about 2 to 3 hours. Next, pick 2 to 4 people other than your club treasurer to conduct the audit. Prior to the audit day, the treasurer should gather records that will be needed for comparison from your financial institutions and from Bivio. On the audit day, the auditors will work through the audit steps, making the records comparisons. If they find any discrepancies, they will note them on the audit checklist. Auditors do not make any corrections themselves. If they find any, when the steps are all completed, the auditors and the treasurer will meet to discuss anything that was found. The treasurer will determine what action is needed, make the corrections, and record the action taken. And last, the treasurer and the auditors will give the final report to the club. It all goes quickly. Once you get done, you'll have done most of the work needed to get your records ready to prepare your club taxes. All you'll need to do is wait for your 1099s to arrive so your treasurer can do a final quick records check. To help you do your audit, we provide you with an audit checklist, which gives you the steps to go through. You'll find a link to it from our help page. It looks like this. You'll see the cover page. It contains instructions on page 2. On page 3, it has a full list of the different records you'll need to collect to do the audit. Now, many clubs have changed brokers in 2024, so you need documents from each broker. There are 7 audit steps starting on page 4. For each step, it gives you a detailed description of what you need to be comparing. Today, we'll be going through all these steps in detail so you can see what needs to be done. The first part of doing your audit is gathering the information you'll be comparing. As I just showed you, you'll find a list of what you'll need in the audit checklist. Things you'll need from your brokerage account are your monthly statements, trade confirmation records. Now, you may have individual confirmations, or your broker might be able to provide you with a special report that is a list summarizing them. You also need your dividend and interest transaction records. You can find these on your monthly statements, or again, you might be able to find a summary list. You need your realized gain and loss report. This will show you the capital gains by lot sold that your broker will be reporting to the IRS. It may have a slightly different name at some brokers, such as a closed tax lot report. Also, an unrealized gain and loss report. You'll need this if any of your stocks went through a reorganization, such as a split, spin-off, merger, or redomicile, or if you paid out any withdrawals with stock. You might also need this report if your broker sold a different lot of stock than Bivio used. Again, this one may have a slightly different name at your broker, such as an open tax lot report. It will show the cost basis details for each lot of each stock that you still own. For any checks you've written, you'll need something to verify that your checks were paid by your broker. Proof could be copies they provide or a summary list. Your treasurer may be the person who's most familiar with both your financial institution records and with using Bivio, so they may need to help you find and gather this information. Sometimes one of the learning experiences about doing an audit is learning the types of information and the way you can get it from your brokerage website. Here are examples of some things you'll find there. You will need your monthly broker statements. On the Schwab site, you can find them by clicking on the Accounts link. Next, select the Statements link. And note that if your club uses a different broker than Schwab, obviously you won't see the same screen layout when you go to your broker's website, but you will be able to find all the information we're discussing on their site. Now the Statements link will take you to this page where you can download all your monthly statements. Make sure you change the date range to the last 12 months and click on Search to display your club statements. Note that your club's TDA or TD Ameritrade statements will be shown on the Schwab statement list if your club migrated during 2024. Next, for Schwab, if you go back to the Accounts menu, you will see a link called History. Once the History page opens, click on the Realized Gain and Loss link. Next, scroll down to see the Realized Gain Loss Summary information. This is your cost basis and capital gains for stocks your club has sold. It is important to get the lot details of the stock sold. To find it on Schwab, go back to the top of the page and click on Export. Then select Export Details to download a list showing cost basis and capital gains for each lot sold. As we will see later, you will compare this list to the capital gains and losses report in Bivio to make sure your capital gains and losses will be reported on your taxes in the same way your broker will report them to the IRS. It's very important that you know how to find this. If any of your stocks went through reorganizations during the year, such as splits, spin-offs, or mergers, or if you transferred any stock to pay a member withdrawal, you will also need an unrealized gain and loss report because those actions affected the cost basis of your stock. In Schwab, you'll find it by going to the Positions tab. This summary page shows the stocks your club still owns. To see the cost basis details for each lot of each stock that was affected by the reorganization, you need to click on the down arrow on the far right of the stock to open up a menu and then click on Lot Details. You will compare this detail to an investment lot cost basis report in Bivio to see if you recorded it as your broker has. During your audit, you'll be looking at specific types of transactions in Bivio, such as dividend payments. What's nice is that you can get lists of specific types of transactions at your brokerage website. In this case, you find those by selecting the History link and then clicking on the Transactions tab. Next, change the date range to previous year and click on Search to see all club transactions for the year. Now, to see only dividend transactions, you need to click on the Filter by Transaction Types. This opens a page where you can select lists of certain types of transactions. In this case, you want a list of the dividends your club received. So at the bottom, click on Deselect All and select Apply. Next, you need to click on the dividends and apply to see only your club dividend transactions. You will be able to easily compare this list to some of the Bivio reports as you do the audit. It's important that you become familiar with finding all this material on your broker's website. Finding it will be a little different for each broker, but it will be there somewhere. Contact your broker if you need help locating information that you need to do your audit. You'll be comparing your brokerage information to a variety of reports you'll find in Bivio. I will show you those reports now. You go to Accounting and Reports and Charts to see the list of reports. You want to enter the date of the report you want to look at. For many of the ones you need, it will be the last day of last year, so 12/31 of 2024. First, you'll use the evaluation report to audit your cash balances, which you'll find at the bottom here, and the number of shares of each stock. Use this Return to the Report List link to go back. You'll use the Transaction History Report when you audit specific types of transactions, such as interest and dividends. This report is nice as it's organized into categories. Again, use the Return to Report List link. Under the yearly reports, you'll use the Income Statement Report, which will show you dividend totals by company. Also down here under yearly, the Member Contributions and Withdrawals Report. It will show you the amount each member contributed and the valuation date that you used to record the payment. The Capital Gains and Losses Report you'll use to see whether the cost basis information and the gain and loss information in Bivio agrees with what your broker will be reporting to the IRS. The Investment Lot Cost Basis Report, which you find up here under Daily, make sure you've got the right date. It will show you the cost basis details for each lot of each stock that you still own. Now, if you've had any member withdrawals during the year, at this link down here is where you can find the reports showing the parameters you use to enter them. You click on the member name, and then you can see the valuation date and the transaction date, what cash and valuation you used, and if you paid out any shares of stock, you'll see them down here. You'll also find transaction lists, which give you the chronological list of transactions and a running balance. We use them all the time as they are very useful. You don't get to these from the reports page, you get to them from your accounting pages. For example, you go to Accounting, Accounts, and click on the name of one of your accounts, and you'll get a list of all the transactions that have been recorded for that account. This also works for the members page. Click on it and you can look at a specific member's transactions. The same is for the investments page. You can see the detail. Click on one of your investments to see all the entries that have been made. You might also need to refer to files you've stored in your files area, which you'll find here under Communications. For example, good things to store there are receipts for expenses, monthly meeting minutes, where you should find votes where you authorized expenses, and stock transactions. You may also find details about withdrawal discussions. Also, your partnership agreement. This is where you should find your club's terms for paying withdrawals, and it may also show you what methods you've agreed are acceptable to allocate expenses. Once all your records are gathered, the information is given to the auditors. The audit checklist includes 7 steps we recommend they do to verify your club records. They are: verify cash balances and number of shares of stock at the start of the tax year. Verify cash balances and number of shares of stock at the end of the tax year. Verify income received is all recorded correctly. Verify any expenses you had were recorded correctly. Verify all your stock transactions were entered correctly and that capital gains and losses are being calculated correctly. Verify member payments were entered correctly so that your member accounts are being tracked correctly. Verify that any withdrawals that were paid were according to your club agreements and that they were recorded correctly in your records. Next, we will go through each of these steps in more detail. We'll talk about why you do it, go through an example of how you do it, and discuss what to do if you find any discrepancies. Now first, just a logistical note. Many clubs do meet in person to complete the audit. Other clubs do an audit without physically getting together. They do the audit virtually by uploading the reports needed for the audit into the club's files area in Bivio. As you can see here, and club members can then log into Bivio and get the information they need to make the audit comparisons. Auditors for the club then do the steps either together using Zoom, but you could also assign a different club member to make the comparisons for each step. 2 people could even work together over the phone using the information they got from your Bivio site to make the comparisons. Now your first audit step is to confirm that you started out the tax year with correct records. To do this, you'll be comparing the brokerage statement from the end of the prior tax year, so 2023, with a Bivio valuation report with the same date. Here's an example of doing this comparison. First, you'll compare the cash balances shown in Bivio to what is shown on the broker's report. They should be equal, or you should have a reason, such as an outstanding check, to validly explain any differences. If you see cash balances listed for accounts on the Bivio report that you don't actually have, you have issues you need to correct. The only balances shown should be for accounts that you actually had at the end of 2023. Next, you'll compare the number of shares of each stock between Bivio and your broker, and the number of shares should agree exactly. There might be slight variations in market value, maybe a few pennies, and this is not a problem, and there's no reason to try and find anything to fix. But if there's a big difference, you should investigate further to make sure you do not have investments without current prices. In this case, you will see a note on your valuation telling you that some of your stocks don't have current prices. This is also a problem that needs to be investigated and addressed. Your club accounting is based on accurate valuations. If there's a stock price that is not being updated regularly, your records and your taxes will not be correct. This is a very important step. Why do we do this step? Well, because if the start of the year numbers for cash balance, number of shares, or stock price are wrong, there is no way the tax year numbers will be correct. What do you do if you find a discrepancy? You need to stop the audit at that point and assess the situation. There are many things in your club's historical transactions that are still affecting your current record keeping. A problem at this point means there are issues in your accounting that need to be addressed. They could be as simple to fix as a small adjustment or as complicated as filing amended returns for your club for prior tax years. Feel free to contact us in support if you find a problem and are not sure what to do to address it. If you get past step 1, it's fine to move on to the rest of the audit. In step 2, the same comparisons are made, but you use reports dated at the end of the tax year you are auditing, which would be 2024. Why do you do this step? Because if numbers don't agree, it will give you an indication that there are items you need to find. Going through the steps of the audit will bring out where they are and what they are. Once you've found them, you'll give them to your treasurer to fix. So for step 2, even if you find a discrepancy, you do not need to stop. Make a note of it and move forward with the next steps of the audit. Now, just a note at this point, as I mentioned before, comparing cash balance and number of shares of stock, like we do in steps 1 and 2, is something your treasurer should do every month to reconcile your accounts. If you do this, you can have a reasonable degree of comfort throughout the year that your Bivio records are being kept correctly, but they don't tell you everything, which is why you're going to audit the information outlined in the next steps. And now Becky will continue with step 3 of the audit.
Thanks, Joanne. In steps 1 and 2, you verified your club's cash balances for the year. Step 3 is where you verify the entries for any income you've received. This will be dividends and interest. You'll be using a Bivio income statement and a transaction history report. And from your broker, you'll use your brokerage statement and a dividend transaction list. But first, you'll compare dividend and interest totals on the income statement to those on the brokerage year-end statement. Note that interest on money market accounts may show up as dividend income on your broker statement. Make sure it's correctly identified in your Bivio records. Next, you'll compare the specific entries using dividend transaction lists from the Bivio transaction history report and a dividend transaction summary list from your broker. You'll confirm the date of receipt, the amount, and the company who paid each dividend, and you'll confirm that they agree. Why do you do this step? Well, you have to pay tax on dividends and interest. The amount and dates need to be recorded correctly, so the tax program will be able to classify and report it as qualified or non-qualified on your taxes. What do you do if there's a discrepancy? Proceed with the audit and note entries where corrections are needed. Step 4 is expenses. A club usually has very few expenses, but expense entries are commonplace in accounting where fraud can occur. In this step, you'll make sure the expenses were both authorized and actually paid, and that they were recorded correctly. To do this, you'll need meeting minutes to show expenses were authorized and receipts that you've stored in your file storage area. Canceled checks or a summary list of checks paid from your brokerage will show whether expenses were actually paid, and these will be compared against a transaction history report from Bivio. You'll also need to know how your club has agreed to allocate expenses. By default, and per IRS regulations, expenses are allocated in proportion to ownership share. If you want to allocate them equally to each member, you need to make sure this method is specifically permitted in your partnership agreement. If you've recorded any expenses in Bivio, you'll find a link on the income statement report, which will take you to a listing like this. Make sure you have meeting minutes that show where each expense was authorized and a receipt to show it was actually paid. Just because expense entries were recorded in Bivio doesn't mean they were actually paid to the proper recipient. To confirm how expenses were allocated, go to the transaction history report. If the note on an expense entry indicates the expense was allocated equally, make sure that it is allowed by your partnership agreement, and that is what was agreed to for the expense recorded. Why do you do this step? It verifies any expenses were authorized by the club and were actually paid. And it also verifies that expenses were allocated to club members in the method your club has agreed on. That will ensure their member accounts in Bivio will be updated correctly. What do you do if there's a discrepancy? Proceed with the audit and note the entries where corrections are needed. Step 5 is done to verify that all your stock transactions have been entered correctly. You want to do this so you know the value of your portfolio is being tracked properly, and that capital gains and losses when you sell stock will be calculated and reported correctly on your taxes. You'll be using a variety of reports to do this step, both from Bivio and from your broker, including the Bivio Transaction Ledger Report, the Bivio Capital Gains and Losses Report, Bivio Investment Transaction Lists, a Bivio Transaction History Report, and a Bivio Investment Lot Cost Basis Report if you had any reorganizations during the year. From your broker, you'll be looking at brokerage trade confirmation reports, brokerage realized gain-loss reports, and brokerage statements for months where reorganizations occurred, and an unrealized gain-loss report if you had any reorganizations during the year. Let's look at exactly what you'll do with this information. Step 5 has 3 parts. In the first part, 5A, you'll verify purchases and sales were entered correctly. Then in part 5B, you'll verify that the capital gains and losses shown in Bivio agree with what your broker shows. And finally, in part 5C, you'll verify that reorganizations were entered correctly and also verify that any cost basis adjustments agree with what the broker shows. In step 5A, you should compare the stock purchases and sales in the Bivio transaction ledger to a summary list of purchases from your brokerage. And you want to make sure these things agree. Purchase and sale prices and number of shares at your broker and in Bivio. Purchase and sale dates at your broker and in Bivio. The total net amount at your broker and in Bivio, total cash. Next, you'll confirm that your capital gain and loss information in Bivio agrees with your broker. Brokers will be reporting your cost basis and capital gains to the IRS. It's important that all the details for any stock sales you had during the year agree with what they show. To do this, you need a report all brokers will provide you at any time during the year called a realized gain-loss report. And you compare that with the capital gains and losses report Bivio provides you. Here's an example of the Bivio capital gains and losses report and a realized gain-loss report from a broker. You need to compare each sale shown on the Bivio report with the same sale shown on the brokerage report. You should make sure the acquisition date, the sales price, the cost basis, and the gain-loss agree between the 2 reports. If they do not, or if you see a wash sale noted, make a note to discuss with your treasurer. They'll need to determine the reasons for any differences and make any corrections needed. Next, you need to confirm your records were correctly updated if any of your stocks went through a reorganization, such as a stock split, spin-off, or merger. These can get complicated, and it's important they be entered correctly in your records. How will you know there's been a reorganization entered? Well, there's several clues that might alert you. First, there's a section on the transaction history report that will show you if your treasurer has entered a reorganization. If you don't see anything there, you may have found that the number of shares of stock did not agree with the brokerage statement when you did step 2. This could happen if your treasurer hadn't recorded a reorganization. And finally, whomever in your club is watching each stock should have made sure the club was alerted when news of the reorganization came out. You should ask your club members prior to the audit to double-check the stocks they're following. To assess what has been entered, first find the brokerage statement for the month the reorganization occurred and look at the transactions that are listed. Make a note to ask your treasurer how they determined what to enter. If there's any doubt about an entry, feel free to ask Bivio support for confirmation. We will do any necessary research and make sure correct entries are made for you. When a reorganization occurs, the cost basis of the shares of stock involved in the reorganization will change. If the reorganization has been entered correctly, the cost basis of all shares after the reorganization will agree between Bivio and your broker. If it doesn't, there are issues in your Bivio accounting that must be investigated and addressed. If you found that one or more of your club stocks went through reorganizations during the year being audited, there's a few extra checks that you need to make. You need to compare information on a broker's unrealized gain-loss report to information on the Bivio investment lot cost basis report. You'll want to run this report on a date right after the reorganization happened. For example, in 2019, Dow Chemical went through a series of 3 reorganizations, and clubs that own those shares ended up with 3 different companies, Dow, DD, and CTVA. You should compare the following things between the 2 reports: the number of shares of each of the stocks in each lot, the open date of each of the lots, and the total cost basis for each of the lots. All these details should agree. If you're doing automatic dividend reinvesting or have bought a stock on many different occasions, you need to make these comparisons for each lot of each stock. Entering reorganizations correctly can be one of the most difficult things your treasurer needs to do. Part of what you receive when you have a Bivio subscription is access to experts that can help you account for them correctly. It's important to make sure reorganizations have been updated in your records in a timely manner. Your treasurer should do these checks right after any reorganization is entered in your accounting. If issues are not addressed in a timely manner, it can become extremely complicated, time-consuming, and possibly expensive to straighten them out if they have affected subsequent transactions. While you have these reports in hand, also compare the cost basis, number of shares, and open date for every lot of every stock your club owns. Here are a few of the reorganizations we've helped clubs make entries for this year. As you can see, many clubs are affected. You can get this link at a link named Reorganization Cost Basis Adjustments on the Bivio Help page. Note that these are only some of those we've addressed for clubs with questions. There are many others. Why do you do step 5? Well, first, it verifies that all stock transactions have been recorded so that the value of the club is being calculated correctly. Your entire accounting and tax reporting is dependent on accurate club valuations. Second, it verifies that basis is being tracked correctly so that correct capital gains and losses will be reported on your income, both for the current year and for future years. This is a very important step. Capital gains and losses will be reported on your 1099 form to the IRS. Your club information needs to agree with what your broker shows on them, and your club records need to be updated in a timely manner when cost basis changes occur. What do you do if there's a discrepancy? Proceed with the audit and note entries where corrections are needed. Auditors don't try and correct them yourselves, but make sure your treasurer works out these issues before your club files any taxes. Step 6 confirms that your members' contributions to the club have been recorded accurately. This is important because these records affect member ownership, both the percentage of the club each person owns and the gains or losses that they have from their investment in the club. They also will affect whether the correct amount of taxable income will be shown on each member's K-1 form. To perform the check, you use the Bivio Member Contributions and Withdrawals Report and the Transaction History Report. You also might want access to your club partnership agreement. You'll be comparing these things to your brokerage deposit transaction summary list or monthly statements from your broker. First of all, your treasurer should require that all members review the annual member contributions and withdrawals report prior to the audit and confirm that what is shown as their contribution is correct. Keep a paper or digital record with your audit report to verify that they've done that. The audit committee should compare the report to a deposits transaction list or to your monthly brokerage statements to confirm that the payments really were deposited in your club brokerage account. For example, here, recorded in Bivio, is a member contribution of $25.01 made by Snow White. And here is the record of that payment deposited in the club's brokerage account. Doc made a payment of $100.04 on January 18, and here is the record of that deposit at the broker. Grumpy's payment of $100.02 on January 18 is recorded here on the broker's deposit list. Step 6 confirms that your members' contributions to the club have been recorded accurately. First of all, you will need to know the answer to the question, what does your club use for the valuation date? Clubs often use either one per month, like this month's meeting date, or the Friday before our meeting, or they set the valuation date that was equal to the date the payment was deposited. If they use one date per month, you should see two things on a member contributions and withdrawals report. For a given month, they should all be the same, and they should not be the same from month to month. If the valuation date is chosen to be equal to the deposit date, you might see different valuation dates for each entry, but the dates you see should agree with the payment deposit dates on your brokerage list. This club uses a single valuation date per month. In March, we see that the valuation dates entered for Snow White and Sneezy were different than the ones entered for the others. This doesn't look right. If the club has only one valuation date a month, they should be the same. It's something to note and have the treasurer check into. For some months, there are no payments recorded for certain members. Is that okay? Well, it might be if the total for the year for each member is okay. That's why you have each member confirm their totals. The next thing you want to use is a transaction history report to confirm that member deposits have been recorded as member payments, not as fees or miscellaneous income. You want to see that each listing in this section is identified as a member payment and not a fee unless you had some unusual situation and you were charging the member a penalty. So in summary, this step verifies that all members are being given proper credit for their investments in the club so that their account is tracked correctly and their taxes are reported to them correctly. If there's a discrepancy, proceed with the audit and note entries where corrections are needed. Your final check, step 7, will only be necessary if you've paid out any withdrawals during the year. It will confirm that withdrawals were processed according to the terms in your partnership agreement and that the correct amounts were paid. You'll be looking at the withdrawal reports that were generated in Bivio when the withdrawal was entered. You may also need to refer to your club partnership agreement. If you transferred any stock to pay withdrawals, you'll also need copies of Bivio investment lot cost basis reports generated right after the dates of the withdrawals. You'll also need copies of unrealized and realized gain-loss reports from your broker that show the number of shares, purchase date, and total cost basis of each lot of each of the stocks that you still owned or have sold after the withdrawal. To determine whether a withdrawal was paid according to the club partnership agreement, you'll have to find the section in the agreement describing the requirements and then review the withdrawal reports to make sure the entries had proper withdrawal transaction date, correct withdrawal valuation date, correct fee assessed if any, and you should also make sure that your club records had been reconciled before the withdrawal amount was determined. If they were not, you might see post-withdrawal adjustments in this section. Most important, did your club pay the member exactly the cash amount shown on the report? If you paid any withdrawals with shares of stock and you still owned any shares of those stocks after the transfer, you have an additional check to do. You need to check that the correct lots of shares were selected as transferred when the withdrawal was entered in Bivio. You do this by checking that the lots of each stock remaining in Bivio are the same ones your broker shows that you still own after the withdrawal transfer. For example, The demo club paid out a withdrawal with shares of stock on June 2, 2021. They transfer shares of AbbVie, Alphabet, Meta, and Microsoft to the withdrawing member. After the withdrawal was recorded, Bivio showed these lots remain in the club accounting on the investment lot cost basis report. A broker's unrealized gain-loss report shows the cost basis details of each stock still owned as of the end of the year. Details of each lot of every stock should be compared to the Bivio report to make sure they agree. Since the club had sold the rest of their Meta stock after the withdrawal, the cost basis details for each lot had to be compared against those on a realized gain-loss report. They would not show on an unrealized gain-loss report at the end of the year. So why do step 7? It verifies you've paid withdrawals according to the method agreed in your partnership agreement. If there's a discrepancy, proceed with the audit and note entries where corrections or future improvements are needed. For instance, if the lots of shares transferred were identified incorrectly when the withdrawal entry was made in Bivio, that will need to be fixed by your club treasurer before your taxes are filed. If a withdrawal has been paid and you've paid the member the wrong amount, it may be impossible to correct the payment amount discrepancies because the member has left and may have already received and cashed their check. It's also almost impossible to make withdrawal payments correctly in another tax year without creating other big issues for your club. It will be up to your club to determine whether to pursue making corrections, but do not do so until you make sure you understand all the issues this might create. You'll probably not be able to fix past incorrect withdrawals, but at a minimum, you'll want to note discrepancies as recommendations for future improvement. This was the last step. To summarize, when you're done, you will have completed these steps. You will verify cash balances and the number of shares of stock at the start of the tax year, and you will have verified cash balances and number of shares of stock at the end of the tax year. You'll verify income received is all recorded correctly. You'll verify any expenses you had were recorded correctly. You'll verify all of your stock transactions were entered correctly and that capital gains and losses are being calculated correctly. You'll verify member payments were entered correctly, so your member accounts are being tracked correctly. And you'll verify that any withdrawals were paid according to your club agreements and that they were recorded correctly in your records. Once the auditors have gone through the steps, here's what should happen. They should discuss any discrepancies found with the treasurer and report them to the club. Your treasurer then would report on the action taken to make corrections. Everyone should sign off on the audit form, and you should pat yourselves on the back. It's party time. Congratulations on making sure your club records are in good shape. And that's how to do an audit. If you followed our recommendations to keep your club accounting as simple as possible, you'll be able to complete the checks very quickly. If you have any questions as you're going through your club's audit, the quickest way to get an answer is to email us with details at support@bivio.com. Please send actual copies of any broker's reports you are comparing to, and make sure to identify the specific issues you have questions about. If you've typed any questions during this webinar or in advance that were specific to your club that we haven't addressed, send them to us in support and we can help you work through them. And now, another poll question. Are you planning to do an audit this weekend? Yes? Some of you? No? And not this weekend, but we plan to do one for most of you. Now, before we take your club's questions, just a brief note about club taxes. Once the audit is complete, there are just a couple more things your treasurer will need to do to get your taxes prepared. They'll need to do a final check to make sure the information on the 1099 forms your broker sends agrees with the information you'll report on your taxes. We'll cover this topic in more depth when we do the tax prep webinar on February 13th. But just to give you an idea, your club should receive your 1099s by February 15th, but check with your broker's website for their latest information on when to expect them. There are several types of 1099s. Forms 1099 Div and 1099 INT report the amount of dividends and interest you've received. Sometimes there's information on them that will mean last-minute adjustments are needed for your Bivio records. They include things like qualified versus non-qualified dividend split, dates on the end-of-year dividend payments, possible reclassification of dividend income, and if you sold any stocks during the year, you'll also receive a 1099-B, which is where your cost basis and capital gains are reported. You'll need to double check to make sure they are the same as your Bivio records show. The work you did on step 5 of the audit should have found any issues you needed to address, so your treasurer won't have to take time to address them when the tax forms are ready. It can be complex and take a long time to fix problems with cost basis. The sooner you find out about them, the more time you have available to get any help you need. Filing taxes is mandatory for all clubs. It doesn't matter how much income you've made or how long you've been in existence. The good news is that once your records are all correct, preparing your taxes is a very quick process. You answer a few questions and press a button, and then you review the forms, e-file them with the IRS, and distribute them to your members. This year, they are due by March 17, 2025, which is all the more reason to get in the habit of spending time now in January, getting your records corrected so you can prepare the forms quickly when you have your 1099s and the Bivio tax program becomes available in February. We anticipate that the Bivio tax program should be available in mid-February, and we'll also be doing a webinar about how to prepare your club taxes on February 13, and this will include the steps for electronic filing. You can sign up now for the webinar at www.bivio.com/club_cafe.